Right down the air with the killers before I knew enough. I just bought a truck for my daughters and bulletproof demand.
I think we're live
And
right
I
now.
did
So
it
just
my
a heads
hustle.
up.
After muscle, a different day, different
I'm just
struggle.
gonna confirm though.
Ain't complacent, I blew face up the devil. Ducking them cases.
What happened?
God was making me humble. I had to beat the streets. Bitch, I play for keeps.
Okay, I'm just waiting to confirm. Oh, it's up. Official, is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. All right, we're here. Let's see real quick. Let me do that.
Yep.
Okay. So, all right. Hi, it's Tanya, Black Lives Matter Sacramento. Who am I with?
This is Victor from Black Lives Sacramento as well.
What's up, y'all? Bishoy from Black Lives Sacramento.
All right. So we are having our Negus is Tired podcast. I think this is episode 7. I'll know for sure once it's over, but I'm guessing that it's 7 because I think our last one was 6.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna talk about some stuff today. We got some people on. I'm trying to talk through a little couple of times so we can get some more people on to watch us. But yeah, so we got some things that we're gonna talk about. They might be a little controversial, but it's necessary. It's necessary conversation. So I'm thinking, how am I going to position this? Let's talk about some things that happened over the last week or so. There was an incident in Sacramento, and I've heard this is happening in the Bay Area as well as Los Angeles as well too. So there's an incident that happened in Sacramento where a woman, I'm not even sure who it was in particular, but someone that was Mexican had their food cart or their food, I'm not really sure what they call it, but a food cart. And they were attacked by some Black folks. I didn't look into too much of the details because I don't know why. I guess emotionally I just wasn't feeling. I wanted it to be fixed before I looked at it. I wanted the situation to be resolved before I looked at it. But I know that some things were exchanged between the two. It ended up being to where, both parties engaged in a way that was not loving toward each other. But what really was brought to my attention is the fact that a lot of brown folks in Sacramento were tagging the hell out of us on Instagram, demanding that we be accountable for something that Black folks did to this person that's a street vendor. And they were demanding that we respond to it and demanding all these things that aren't really they're not our work. Our work is very defined in our mission and it's not part of our work, although it doesn't mean that we don't empathize or that we don't care, but it was just an unrealistic response to us. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit with folks. And I am aware that both parties talked and they made up. I'm also aware that both parties did something that was not nice to each other. So it the physical part was a response to something else. So I want to talk about it though. I want to talk about yeah, I'll let y'all expand. I don't want to expand anymore. So go ahead. I'm gonna go to Victor first and let's talk about this.
Yeah, I think to me, I tend to look at media and see where things are placed overall. So, when it's happening in Sacramento, when you find a story like this that happens in Sacramento, you find stories that are happening in the Bay Area, you find stories that are happening in LA. It's very nuanced, right? So I think I think there's two different levels, right? I think there's the idea of what intercommunity violence looks like and how we resolve it, especially when we're supposed to all be there for folks. When folks are saying Black Lives Matter, to be an ally in that aspect of it, and then raise something like this up to the level of being media worthy, or to talk about what's happening intercommunity, like inside of the community, is still a form of anti-Blackness, right? Because most of the idea of the violence that happens inside of our communities happen between, folks that look like us. So it's a way of showing Black folks as being demonized in a lot of ways. And then to come and ask BLM when we looked at, 200 folks who have been killed by police officers, Black folks who have been unarmed, killed by police officers in the last year, to be like, hey, why don't you comment on what's happening here, right? Like, our stance is always going to be like, we don't condone intercommunity violence because we love each other, period. That's not something that we want to see happen, right? But at the same time, we're focused on the idea that, we're looking at officers who just killed George Floyd, who are on trial, who may walk. We're looking at a precedence of violence that happens to Black folks inside of the community, where the people who perpetuate that violence walk. And, I'm glad in this instance in Sacramento that the folks were able to come together and find a solution. Same thing happened inside of the Bay. Like, Black folks came out to, support and to rally around the community. Like, there's not a division there ever, but I do think the media tries to draw that division. And to me, that division, that is always another form of anti-Blackness, especially in communities that are severely anti-Black. Like, and that's something that nobody really likes to talk about or likes to delve into. But, the Latin American community, even in itself, where most folks got a Black grandma somewhere, you know what I mean? Like, just in the nature of the slave trade of what happened, like there was more of a slave trade that happened in South America than it happened in North America. You know what I mean? Like, that's just the realization of what happened during that time frame, right? And there's still anti-Blackness that goes along with inside of those communities. And so to me, I think there's a lot to unpack there. It's very nuanced in the way that it is unpacked, but never are we gonna be like, oh yeah, that's like, of course we don't condone intercommunity violence. Like, that ain't right. Like, everybody knows that, you know what I mean? But to highlight and ask folks who are defending Black lives against the police, I think it raises to that level of like, your anti-Blackness is showing a little bit, just a little bit.
It creates it's like we don't have to create a division out of this moment.
Yeah.
It actually come together in this moment. That should be the first response, is to come together in this moment and show like this is what it's supposed to look like. But yeah, go ahead, Bishoy.
Yeah, I think these, this example, and we discussed a little bit a couple of days ago around like this also kind of example that's been pretty, at least televised and also spoken about on like social media for sure, is right. We're seeing a huge amount of anti-Asian violence, right? Like, it is, and being in the Bay Area, it's like there is, it's being really intensely covered, really intensely spoken about, as it should be, right? Like, when there is violence on anybody, and especially elders, right? We don't want that. Like, we never want that.
Right.
And I think the issue becomes that when these matters arise, I think folks often, they show that they're not really with the shit. It's like they might have gone to a rally, they might have like just their Twitter feed and Instagram talking about Black Lives Matter, and I follow this person, and then when something happens, right, where it could be that it was, in the example that you gave, okay, it was, two Black folks supposedly got into it with a brown person, Latinx person. When Black folks are the presumed perpetrator, it's like, oh, y'all not talking now. And it's like, no, now what you're doing is you're separating what Black Lives Matter is fighting for, which is for the liberation of everybody. But, it's concentrated in Black people, because when our most oppressed are liberated, everyone therefore will become liberated. It is that. And so I think it means like, oh, what about this? Is like you never really recognize that we're actually in solidarity. You came throwing up a fist, holding a flag, holding a sign, with the idea really of, I'm helping these Black people out. I'm coming to do this for Black people. It's like, look at me helping out Black people. And it's like, no, you don't realize that we are also fighting for you in the very same manner. right? And you're just kind of separating it and looking down in a sense at Black folks, like, oh, they need my help, right? And so I think, that plays a part. And I also think that, like, it's unfinished stories, right? It's like, in terms of like the Asian American attack, the Asian attacks and acts of violence in the Bay Area, right? Yes. Is that happening? Yes. Right. Those are happening. And at the same time, we're not telling the story about the displacement of Black folks in the Bay Area. And we know, yes, majority is white, but the next largest population is Asian, right? That, it's in Black communities like the Bayview. You have Asian folks with the stores, Asian folks that's really taking in that money and then going back to Asian communities and spending it. So no one talks about that that animosity comes from displacement of Black people, right? It comes from that, stems from that. We look at like every field, especially things like, like the medical field, where, we talk about just the anti-Blackness historically in the medical field, and how, on doctors' watches, we've, the number of Black women deaths during pregnancy, and the not taking Black folks seriously when they're saying that they're in pain or they need something. We think not all our doctors are white folks, right? I mean, 20%, 25% of doctors in America are Asian, right? And anti-Blackness is in the medical field. Well, I know it's not just white folks doing it. I know it's Asian folks, right? And I know it's, everybody enacts an anti-Blackness. We enact in moments of anti-Blackness in our lives. And so it's just one of those things that I get frustrated with, because we don't tell full stories. And when we do, when Black folks are the perpetrator, we highlight it and immediately criminalize and demonize, like, look, all your people ain't good, right? And it's, I think it follows that same tone. I think it gets so frustrating, because young people, like, it just continually creates a division. And then it's like this, like, oh, what about us? When in reality, everyone is profiting off of and taking from Black movements historically.
Yeah. There's been issues in Sacramento as well with folks in the Asian community experiencing violence. And I think at our council, I didn't watch it, but I think at our last council meeting, even the chief of police even gave a statement in regards to it. But I also know, like, growing up, my best friend was Mexican growing up from the 6th grade all the way through high school. She died the summer before our senior year. But her family, like, she dated Black guys. So, and her family swore that I was the reason that she dated Black guys. So whenever I was with her, which was all the time, like, we were inseparable, her dad would be super abusive to her. And when she passed away, he ended up apologizing to me for how he treated her when I was there. He would do that so that she wouldn't want me there. Make her scrub the floor on her hand and feet, or hands and knees with like a brush. He would slap her if we laughed while she was doing it. Makes her take off his shoes and socks. Like, there was anti-Blackness that I was experiencing in my best friend's home. And then, like, even within the community, there were brown folks that would call her an N lover. Young brown men would call her an N lover. And so I would hear that, and it's like, bruh, like, I'm experiencing this. And then after high school, I worked for a beauty supply, a Black beauty supply that was owned by some Koreans. And I was accused of stealing, and I was fired, and I never stole nothing. They thought that somebody stole something from there, that I let them on purpose. And therefore, I got fired. But like, there was anti-Blackness in that. And I've seen my little brother, like, he's dated women that are not Black, and their families I don't know what they tell their kids, but their kids are not fully committing to him. In high school, his girlfriends weren't fully committing because, some family stuff. So I see these communities, like, they'll disown their kids for dating Black people, but then they'll be demanding that, we do things for everybody. And that's the whole reason that we say Black Lives Matter, is because we've been neglected, and Black people have been carrying everybody since we got here. Like, we got pictures of us nursing white women's children. We've been carrying everybody because we feel like, it's like we've been conditioned to feel that we're not worthy to just fight for ourselves, or to put our foot down and say, hey, I'm fighting for myself. And so people like, well, you're not doing anything for us and people do things for you. And it's like, okay, well, I don't want conditional support to begin with. Like, if you fight with me, then fight with me and know that I'm fighting for you and I'm fighting for all other oppressed people. And we are in solidarity with each other. I was getting those messages, like the tags. I had to turn our tagging off for a little bit because people weren't just saying, well, why aren't you doing this? Or why, what are you going to say? They were like yelling at us and cussing us out and like calling us names and saying that we're trash or that we're just really like racially tinged language coming from brown folks because of something that happened by some other Black folks. So we're like this monolith, and I don't understand like why, like of all the people to do that, why would brown folks do that? You know, but I understand it's anti, but I know the answer to that. I just don't see the logic in it. But yeah.
I think that just, I think also reminded me of just like the piece around culture. Brown folks, Asian folks have really taken Black, I mean, everyone has taken Black culture, right? And commodified off of it and profited off of it and just taken it upon themselves as it's theirs. And I think that's so prevalent in certain areas. I think of the Bay Area, I said this, before, of like, I have never been in a space where there are brown folks that say the N-word and throw that around like it's nothing more than Black folks do. And it's a norm. It's a norm. Asian folks doing it, right? And it's like, and not saying that the N-word is just like a summative of Black culture, but even taking something like that, where Black folks, in terms of language, Black folks are deemed not literate. Black folks are deemed that the English that Black folks speak is not a proper English that garners any aspect of success. And yet people who speak Spanish, oh, you get college credit, right? And you get better colleges depending, you take 2 years of Spanish or Mandarin at school, right? Like language for other minorities is really, really, it kind of endeared. It's like, oh man, if you take Spanish, you're gonna get paid more. Mandarin's coming up, right? That's a really, you got to start taking that if you're gonna be in the business world, right? And that, is seen as now a profitable language, a language that is languages that are considered educated and sophisticated, and you take it, versus like Black language that's seen as illiterate, and yet you're speaking that. You're saying the word more than I am. You talk like I am. The slang that you have is from us, and yet you don't get in trouble and I do.
Right.
But I think that speaks to, again, a larger, like, I don't like drawing distinctions or separations, but there is, right? Like, the Black experience in America and the Americas, period, is different from anyone else's experience, right? Like, I have a deep appreciation for folks who are Spanish or from Latin America and the colonization that happens and how that robs the indigenous of their land and their language, right? Like that affects me deeply. I have a resonance and understanding of where that comes from, you know what I mean? But at the same time, when we look at these two parallels, you can see that Black folks have always been, in some regards, a way of how folks have gained capital, right? And so when I think about any type of violence that happens in a community, I start to look at like the resources, right? Like, I can't go down to Stockton Boulevard and I'm not going to see, I mean, I might see a Black security guard for sure, you know what I mean? But overall, I'm not gonna see a Black person working at Wingwall RV Facts, right? Like, I'm not gonna see that happening there. So what you see is that the community builds for themselves and takes care for themselves and capitalizes for themselves. And what you also see is, on the hindsight of that, there's violence that happens inside of the community that is straight Asian. You get what I mean? Like, home invasions is like, there are different levels of stuff that is happening for violence that happens inside of that community, but that gets resolved differently than when there's a Black person. And to me, from a level like that is like, that's the thing that has to be questioned and talked about, because the police use that level of like, oh, there was this one person who did this, you know what I mean? That isn't really, that statistically is an anomaly. That's not something that's consistent. It's not something that happens all the time. It's not a rise in anything, right? But now what it does is allow a police narrative to say that that's the case. And so now when I go into these areas to go do what I do, which is spend my money, right? Like then I'm looked at differently about how I'm approached and what I'm going there for. You know what I mean? And so for me, in each and every single one of these communities, the difference between what happens in those communities of folks who, whether you be Latin American or whether you be Asian, there's a home country, there's a continent, there's something that draws resources back to that Black folks don't have that. And I say Black folks who are Black in America, right, in the Americas, that don't have that same experience, right? So I'm always weary of when Black folks are used in every community for crime statistics. You know what I mean? Like, how often did that really happen, bro? Like, versus the other crime that's there. Like, why is it that my face has to be the one that's shown when that happens? What I can say about the SAC aspect, and what I love about what happened in Oakland, like Black folks showed up and in each one of those spaces, because there is nothing but love. And I love the fact that these two families were able to resolve what happened with this cart, because we live, for the most part, when it comes to brown folks and immigrants, period. If you are in this country, if you're in the United States, you're gonna be bumping up against some Black folks, period. We all live on the same block. So when I say inter-community violence, I mean just that. You in the same community that I am. Like, I know your mom, your dad, right? Like right up the street. You know what I mean? So I think in ways that we resolve things when it comes to like our issues internally versus involving the police is a whole lot better. Because 9 times out of 10, if you've been on the block for a while, your grandma know my grandma, your mom know my mom. And if shit got out of hand, then somebody's gonna regulate that. We can come and resolve that between us versus trying to make the police look like all of a sudden Black folks just pop off for no reason. You know, so I mean that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, there was a couple of years ago, there was another string of violent like robberies in a particular community that was mostly Hmong folks um, in South Sac. And the robberies were young Black men that were robbing them, you know. And so that the media took this and started showing the faces, and it became this race thing, right? And
It's not.
come to find out, like, it all started like prior to that. Not saying that any of this is good or any of it's a valid reason, but it started because there was some Hmong folks going into Black like territories where they were slanging or whatever and started slanging their own shit. And so there was a beef between these folks because of this territory stuff. So there was more to it, and the media doesn't cover that. It just shows, you know, these elder, you know, Hmong folks that aren't speaking English that well. And so you feel sorry for them because they're old and they're not talking well English, and they're scared and they're crying and they're shook. And so I think the media does a really good job at dividing us. But then I think we also do a really good job at dividing us as well. And that it's a distraction. And that's kind of the topic of tonight is distractions.
Well, and
Did
I
you
think
mind?
like what Troy said, that's a lot of it's always an untold story. You know what I mean? There is always an untold story when it comes to the media. Like and to me, that's the thing that I'm always looking for is what is the untold story that's coming from the media.
Were you gonna say something, Bashoy?
No, I just like that also made me just think around like model minority, right? Like we know that in America, the stereotype of model minority is Asian, right? Is a specific type of Asian that fits, you know, what's deemed as uh, academically inclined, as you know, the X, Y, and Z, right? As, oh, this is great for middle management, right? Not necessarily custodial work, right? Oh, they kind of in the upper echelon of like, you know, whatever business or corporation or whatever, right? And so it you know, it makes me think of like people do perpetuate stereotypes, right? I mean, that's just the reality. And I think when you get told your entire life that, you know, in America, you are smart. You are the smartest of all minorities. You are the one that's great at math. Right. You're going to feel that way in many ways. You're going to actually profit from the system that deems you, you know, eligible to have like this much of success within their system. Right. Like, and I think it just plays into it. You know, I think of my students all the time. And I think often, you know, Asian students are, you know, this idea of like, oh, you know, it's too easy, or, you know, for kids who failed, you just need to work harder, right? And they begin to take on that very system that has told them, hey, you're successful. You could do this better than anyone here. And then you have Black and brown folks, and specifically young Black students, who get told the complete opposite. And they see Asian students, you know, perpetuating this notion of like, oh, I'm better than everyone in this class, right? And that's just real, because I think people, you know, enjoy when they profit from the system. All of us do in some sense or another. And so, you know, that just comes up for me, because again, it's like when you get told something your entire life, you do often perpetuate it in some sense.
Right. That reminds me of an expanded version of colorism. Like we have that within our own, you know, light skin, dark skin. You know, we have that. It's, I don't even want to, it's part of colonialism, but I want to call it just whiteness. Like it's part of something that white folks have ingrained in our, like everything we do. Like there's the lighter, it's a, you know, the lighter you are, the better you are. The further away you are from Blackness, the better you are. And so even within our own community, so like even within the Asian community, you have folks like Chinese and Japanese, and then you've got the Hmong, the Lao, Filipino, you've got, you know, or within brown communities, like some people say that they're white, but they've got, you know, but they're also Hispanic because they are white passing. And some people can't do that because they're very dark skinned, or they're dark skinned and they don't want to admit that they've got Black in their history because Blackness is not, you know, it's not acceptable. So I feel like whiteness has just done so much, like has traumatized this country and every culture in this country. And we do a really good job. Well, I don't want to say it like that, because we learn this shit. We learn this shit and we hold this shit and we display it. Like we've all displayed it at some point in time. We've had to unpack and unlearn once we figure out that this exists. I know I did. But like, and this just shows like this is a perfect example of how anti-Blackness, and when I say anti-Blackness in this context, I'm applying it to every single culture in this country or on this continent or anywhere, because it's everywhere. But anti-Blackness is just thick as fuck. Like it is thick as fuck everywhere. And when the first thing that folks do is yell at Black people when they see two people fighting, and the first thing they see is race, and then they come yell at Black people, that just shows. And that in my brain, I'm thinking, you were never good with us. You were never good with us. You were waiting for this moment. It felt like white people attacking us, but I don't know. Unless somebody else has something to say, I'm gonna go on to the next thing. Do you? Victor?
No, I just I mean, you summed it up so well. It's so beautiful. I think colorism and anti-Blackness applies across the spectrum. And you know, I agree that these are distractions. And the reason why I appreciate talking about them is that they allow for us to go deep and educate about the experience of it, right? Like so that when it happens again, people can start to think about the options of like, how has colonialism impacted this? How has colorism impacted this? How am I engaging in anti-Blackness or not engaging in anti-Blackness by watching or consuming this story or perpetuating this story? So to me, I think, you know, anytime that we can spend the time breaking that down, because all of that shit is thick, it's dense. It takes a long time to unpack. It takes unpacking it ourselves, you know what I mean? Let alone for somebody else who's like, no, I'm justified in all that I feel. It's like, okay, I hear you, but let me walk you through this, you know what I mean? So I always appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of unpack some of that for ourselves and for other people. So I appreciate y'all.
And had this situation been a little white lady and a brown person or a Mexican person attacked her cart, it would be a whole immigration conversation. It would be a whole anti-Black conversation about brown people. So this is why it's like, I don't get why you don't see this. Like you're doing what they do to you, but that's a symptom of abuse. So
and that's the thing is like when you really start to see this like a playbook, like when you start to see the white people playbook and how they run it,
right.
then you see it. Like Black folks become immigrant. Like they practice the tactics that they have on Black folks and have garnered it so well that it's a weapon that they expand to use upon other people. Like that's why when you can look at someone saying Black Lives Matter and we're trying to get free, why it breaks everybody else up out of that system is that the technologies and weapons of anti-Blackness that they've used and they've developed over time against Black people are weapons that they use against brown people, Asian people, anybody else that they deem at that moment that's deserving of whatever they say they do. It's a weapon, it's a tactic that they use. And when you can see that as an art, then you stop feeding into it. You know what I mean? Because you do realize that, yeah, man, had that been on the other news, they would have been blasting that, and white people would have been all up in arms about something that isn't the norm. That's not that's a statistical anomaly. That's not me saying that's a statistical anomaly. That's what the police say. That's not like, and I don't even fuck with them on that. Like, that's what the police say is our statistical anomaly based off of their own data. You know what I mean? It's a sensationalization of something that took place so that they can put Black people or immigrants or whoever in a bad light. That's the playbook.
And it keeps them relevant. It keeps the media relevant.
And it keeps the police relevant because it scares a whole ass fucking community when that shit's not really happening. Like, it makes the Black person a boogeyman that says you should call 911 anytime you see a Black person in your store. Like, it perpetuates the same idea of feeding police on a narrative that's not real. It's statistically an anomaly. But they love feeding that, especially to people who, you know, don't see that as a statistical anomaly or didn't grow up around people who didn't absolutely look like themselves. You know what I mean? Like, that's an easy fear tactic to be able to use against somebody that says, yeah, you're justified, man, in calling the police to have them shoot up somebody. Because that's what that sounds like to me. You know what I mean? When the police pop out of a car and you call them, like, it's justified. When statistically, that's an anomaly. That's not something that statistically happens all the time.
And it's like generational. It's a generational narrative. Like, this isn't like, it's not a narrative that just gets perpetuated within the last 200 years, but these are narratives that are perpetuated in cultural history through art, through beauty standards, right? We see that in other countries, like a black man being the boogeyman is something that's existed in art all around the world, in music, in like, that's why we see caste system in South Asia. That's why we see beauty standards where you have people bleaching their skin in Asia, right? Like, those are real because anti-Blackness has been a consistent narrative, and the colorism of, like, the darker you are, the more terrifying, the more criminalized that you are. And I think it's also this piece on, like, comparisons. Like, it allows us to then have this, like, oppression Olympics, right? I'm more oppressed than you, but and I think it's like, we have to come to a realization, whoever's doing this work, that it is okay to say that Black people, specifically Black women and Black trans folks, are the most oppressed people in this world, right? Because it's statistically true, culturally true, socially true, historically true. And I think it just, again, creates that comparison of, like, no, I'm more oppressed. But it's like, no, we know who the most oppressed are. And when we can liberate that space, everyone else gets liberated in the, you know, in the same vein.
That made me want to go into a whole nother conversation about misogyny and patriarchy, and because all of that is linked to it. It's like, I mean, when I look at, like, like, I got folks, I'm part of, like, when I say communities, I mean literally, like, I'm part of communities on, like, social media where it's like, there's spaces for gay folks, there's spaces for folks that are particularly gay women. And when I see certain things, like, I see certain gay women being accepted, but I don't see gay men being accepted the same way because they're feminine. But when you see a masculine woman, you know, it's like, that's more acceptable to patriarchy, to, you know, the folks that shit, and this is a whole nother conversation, but I see those accepting, like, people, like, there's it's okay to be that gay masculine female that hangs out with all the niggas. You know what I mean? Like, that's okay. But if you're a femme, and I'm gonna say male for this conversation, but you could be non-binary, you know. But if you're male presenting and you're feminine, and if you're male presenting in any way and you're feminine, like, they get shat on the most by within our community, outside of our community. So yeah, it goes into this whole, like, there's layers of it. There's layers. It's anti-Blackness, it's patriarchy, it's all the shit that white people have taught us. And we, yeah.
It's their norms, not ours.
I know. That's the thing. We have to unpack those things. That has to be done. It's so necessary. Bishoy brought up like who the most are, the most impacted are. And I'm just like, because it's these systems that they've created that make us the most impacted, and we don't see it. We see it, but a lot of people don't see it. And so it has us hurting ourselves. When brown folks attack Black folks because of a fight between Black and brown folks, like, they're hurting themselves. They're not hurting us, they're hurting themselves. So we have to get on the same page. We have to be unified. And we have to realize, like, what work, what is your work? We come back to that again. What is your work? Because I just don't get why it came to us. I'm like, okay. So I posted our mission statement on IG, like, okay, this is what we do. This is our work. But yeah, I think I'm gonna move on to the next thing. I don't know all the extreme details behind this. Again, it's one of the, I guess I avoid things that are gonna stress me out. So 90, is it billion or million?
Million.
So $90 million. So just for the record, Black Lives Matter Sacramento is not part of the national organization or the global network. We were at one point, but we left. I want to say in June of 2019, we separated from the national organization and the global network. So I'm putting that disclaimer out here up front. We are not part of that. And I'm not saying that as if, like, I'm saying that I'm being transparent. And I don't want anybody to come back and be like, you represented us. No, we're not representing anybody but Black Lives Matter Sacramento in this space right now. So Black Lives Matter, the global network, got $90 million in 2020. I guess that information came out with like their taxes or something that was public information. And so there's been all these posts on Facebook. I'm seeing them from Black people mostly. Like, where did that money go? And, just a lot of mistrust. And so I want to talk about a little bit, just to, have these hard conversations and talk about money and talk about this work and talk about activism and talk about how money is spent when you do this work and how it should be spent when you do this work. If folks that are doing this work should be paid or not. How hard is this work and how easy is this work and what is work like, and what do donations, let's talk about what donations look like. If somebody donates to an organization for their work, then what does that look like? So I don't know, I'm always gonna go in the order of Victor first and then Bishoy second. So I'm gonna go Victor first.
I saw the article, and so I guess I can start. I think this is another nuanced discussion, right? Out of that 90 million, 21 million went to Black organizations. That's 21 million that would not have gone to Black organizations at all, because that would have been 21 million that would not have been there. Do I know what other things that they were facing or what other plans they have with that funds or what they were doing? No. Can that be leveraged as a criticism? Sure. Be more transparent with it, whatever. What I do know is that Goodwill, like, I'm just like, I'm done criticizing Black folks at the level of what folks want me to criticize Black folks for doing. Well, what's fucking normal? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's not transparent. At 21, like, they showed how much money came in. They showed what they did with the money. If there are additional questions with it, then let's ask those additional questions and allow folks to come up with the answers to that. But what I can say is, before BLM came into to matter to existence, I don't necessarily know that 21 million that went to Black organizations would have been there, right? I don't know that we would have seen a national struggle that's happened like collectively. I think there are other things that concern me about, like, what folks feel, like where BLM starts from, what families who have been like the victims of police violence feel, and where they're coming from, folks, and like the real activists that have been on the road, like been on the ground during the work, specifically in Ferguson. right? Like those types of things speak to me. Like those are questions that I'd like to see answered, right? Um, I'm also not dumb about the inside of what happens in this work. Like I love y'all to death because I know the stress that happens with coming to do this work. You know what I mean? I realize that a lot of activists see an early death, and that's not a joke. That's just real. Whether it be health problems or whether it be police or whether it be something else, like folks who say and take stands against the police are doing a whole lot of other extra shit, and folks who aren't at the center of that aspect of it, who like to comment, it's not that it frustrates me because it's okay. Everybody's allowed to have their opinion, but I see what happens in Ferguson with those folks with folks who are disappearing who should fucking still be here. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's still a whole lot of work that has to be done. There's still a whole lot of work that can be done with transparency. But 21 people, $21 million going to Black organizations. I don't know what they're planning on building from where they are. I'm still giving folks benefits of the doubt. I just say when it comes to people who have been, when it comes to these families who have been who have experienced police violence, that I think it's warranted to be able to answer and talk with a request different than having to be in a courtroom. Like I don't think we should be going into courtrooms to, like, we shouldn't move like white people move. You know what I mean? Like that's just me. Like, you know what I mean? We gotta, but understanding that folks got to do what they got to do all at the same time. But that's how I feel.
I want to add more context to it before I go to you, Bishoy, and to speak to what Victor just said. So there apparently there's news that the Mike Brown's family in Ferguson is also demanding that they get some of the money. And it's not just because they're a family that they fought for, it's because they are a family that BLM became BLM off of. And there is a lot of complaints around, from folks on the ground in Ferguson. There were a lot of complaints around the fact that, like, the founders of BLM went to Ferguson, took a photo shoot, maybe had one event or attended an event, and then not photo shoot, take one picture, and then they left, and like all the work that was needed on the ground, the folks in Ferguson were left to do that work without any resources. And so that's been a complaint from folks on the ground in Ferguson. And it's valid. It's part of the reason, it's one of the reasons that we left as the global network. And then following that was 6 deaths of 6 really well-known activists out of Ferguson, and they were mysterious deaths and they were murders. 2 of them were found burnt in the trunk of a car. One woman's son was found lynched in her backyard. Yeah, there's just, and one died on a bus of a heart attack, but he was young and running for city council. So like, but that is something that I agree with you, Victor. Like, if we're fighting the system, we don't act like the system. We don't move like the system. We don't go to courts and sue each other. We have mediations and talk to each other. But go ahead, Bashoy. I just had to add that.
No, I mean, I think you just, finished that piece so perfectly. I just think of it like everybody is so into Black people's pockets. When it comes to Black people and Black folks' money, it is magnified immensely by everybody. And I think it goes to show this anti-Black notion around just the distrust of Black people who have some sense of empowerment financially. I mean, it's the reason why we see the Black middle class often end up going down in class to being very poor, right? I mean, just Black folks in this country, when having any sense of money, and maybe, excluding this piece, because like you said, I think these concerns are valid. And, you said this on so many occasions, Tanya, of like the most important part of doing this work is taking care of the family. This family is grieving. The family needs support. And that's what we're there to do, and to be with and to be in solidarity with. And so if they're not being taken care of, if their needs aren't being met, and if their voices aren't being uplifted, then we're not doing the work, right? And so, like you said, that's validated. But at the same time, just I think in general, is everybody wants to know what Black folks are doing with money, right? And it needs to be in how everybody else deems successful. If you don't spend your money like this, oh, why you spend this much money on this piece? Oh, why you're your whatever you want to call it, boss, or you're the supervisor, why they kind of taking a little more money home than this, right? Like, and I think it just comes with this inherent mistrust of Black people with money. And nobody asks questions when they give their money to Kyle Rittenhouse,
Right.
when they fundraise, when churches and white folks all over this country raised $2 million. Not all of it went to his bail. Do you ask him where your money went? No. Will you raise money for some random ass person on Twitter? You ask where the money went? No. Right? You never, do you ask Jeff Bezos where all his billions go? When he don't pay his workers, and we don't give them any type of insurance? Oh no, you don't ask. You don't even think twice. When Black people have money, it's like, where is it? What you doing with it? What you gonna spend it on? And again, that just speaks to the anti-Blackness that we were talking about earlier.
Plus, it's like, the first thing I want to say is like, so I've had hella jobs all my life, because I don't know, a lot of Black people I know, we've all had hella jobs for some reason. Like, I've had a lot of customer service jobs. I've done a lot of tech support. I worked for Comcast. I worked for Verizon. I worked for AT&T. I worked for Apple. I worked for all these companies that we all spend our money on. But this work that we do here has been the hardest, most important work I've ever done in my life. I've never had work this hard, but that was this important. Like that it directly impacts me. When I worked for Apple, it was weird because every quarter or every 6 months, they would have these things where we go into this big room, like everybody gets to get off the phones and we all go to the room and we talk about all of the money that was made year to date, right? And like, they talk about their profits and everybody cheers, but nobody's getting those profits. Like we profited 400% this year or so far this year, but we're not getting raises because there's a scale of how high you could get a raise and it could only be a quarter this time. Like, we're not getting raises and like people are cheering, woo, Apple made 400%, I don't get that. But with that being said, you've got companies that have offshore accounts and don't pay their taxes and nobody's asking them questions about shit. And it might get a little bit of energy at one point, or one organization might be focused on it, but nobody's consistent, especially Black folks. We're all getting our iPhones. We're all buying our iPhones, even though they're not paying taxes. So yeah, it's a distraction. It's a huge distraction. Yeah.
I love how you did that. Reminded me like every job I worked at too, right? Like I worked at pizza places, I worked at McDonald's, I worked like Ross, and you were so right. When you work in the back and they like, hey, profits went up this much percent, you like, yeah, like you just get all excited, like, hey, I'm about to go work some more for you. I'm not gonna take my lunch today, actually. And then they, throw you maybe a pizza party. You get a little pizza at the end of the month, and you don't question it. You don't question it.
That's real though. It's like, it's this culture that it's capitalism. It's this culture. And let's talk about though, but let's bring it back to activism. Like, I've had to be reminded this by my dear friend Victor. Like, it's okay to get paid for doing this work. It's okay to get paid for working hella hard.
It's necessary. Like it's not even okay. It's necessary. You know what I mean? Like you hold shit that it's just 100. You hold shit that I can't hold. You know what I mean? Like the fact that you hold what you hold allows for me to be able to go to work and do what I do. You know what I mean? And my job is all about mitigating. I try to mitigate as much as I can what I participate in that allows for me to be the abolitionist that I am. You know what I mean? We should not expect for folks, if we have the capacity to build, to not be paid. Like, why will we do that? You know what I mean? And that's not a bad thing at all. Like, to me, this is all about, to me, I look at it as capacity building. You know what I mean? Like, I look at what, if they had 91 million, what's the capacity that we can build to free more Black folks? What can we do to get more frontline soldiers? Like, how do we build? Because we know we're in a fight. Like, the fight is here. And the other thing that I look at people with when they talk about the level of accountability, like of how Black folks need to hold Black folks accountable, I'm like, on the 6th, I watched white people storm the Capitol, and I only had one of two conclusions: either the police and everybody was in on that shit, or it was the worst security measure that it was. And I can't believe that, because I was there at the King March when I seen these motherfuckers line up in the street and have gates and draws on. Like, I can't believe that it's the other. I have to believe the other side of that. So when I'm looking at how they hold themselves accountable in the war, I don't got time to think about what these, and with all due respect, 21 million got put into Black communities and to Black like hands that weren't there before. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I care about what these families who have been impacted are. Do right by these families, period. And not in the subject, and let's figure out how we're going to build capacity. At the end of the day, if it's not one of those three things, I don't have no business asking no questions. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean that from a capacity building way, because they're out there building capacity. Like, not only are they building, they're recruiting. Every white boy that comes out who can get $120,000 salary or $250,000 salary working for the police, coming to get our asses. Like, nobody asks questions about that. Like, every police car you look at is $1 million, $500,000 sitting on your block if it's two motherfuckers in it. Do you ask questions about that? Like, how many of them motherfuckers do you see every day? Like, to me, it's about your priorities, about what you're looking at. Like, if there's stuff that needs to be done, let's talk about that. Let's get it done. But let's stay focused on where we're getting robbed. I pay into a system that I have no choice but to pay into every day. That gives millions of dollars to people to hunt people who look like me, period. I don't have a choice. If I go to work and I pay taxes, that's what happens. I literally pay into a country taxes that says that slavery still exists legally. I don't have a choice. So until like that becomes the forefront of the conversation, whatever other stuff that people want to talk about to me doesn't seem so valid. Yes, you deserve to be paid. Yes, you deserve to be compensated. We deserve to be able to take money from the police 100%, because you're doing the work that social workers should be doing. You're doing the work that grief counselors should be doing. You're doing the work to actually help the community that these motherfuckers are getting paid for, but never get down to the level of seeing those families without trying to absolutely fuck them over to get them to take whatever police deal they are. So yeah, I appreciate you, because you hold a level of capacity that I can't hold. And the system is refusing to hold for us, period. We gotta appreciate the folks who are on the front line who are doing that. And if we don't, I don't know how we sustain, because you're what's building capacity in Sacramento. And people can be mad about that. They can be mad about it today. They can be mad about it tomorrow. But everything that I've seen from you is you're building capacity. And in the next 5 to 10 years, what they see from you is going to be even greater than what they see right now. So if they're mad, just wait.
Yeah, I think with, in terms of just being compensated, I just look, in terms of like revolutionary suicide, right? I know we even talked about that last podcast, but I think of Huey Newton saying revolutionary suicide is not, you're not trying to die for the cause. The opposite. It's your love to live, your will and desire to live a life. And if that is what with the risk of knowing death may happen, right? That's the risk. It's not I want to die. It's not I want to go malnourished. It's not I don't want hot water. It's not those things. It's understanding there's a risk. But we need to definitely take care of our folks who are doing this activist work, especially at full time, as it's everything that they have completely immersed themselves into. Like myself, I have the luxury and the privilege to do something else at the same time of doing this work, which inevitably puts less on me and more on someone like Tanya, right? Or puts more on Victor, or puts more on somebody else who is taking more of a load in this revolutionary work. And the expected thing is not to compensate them, not to make sure that they have, I think of the Nation of Islam, when they took care of their folks. They housed them, right? not to say that where the money right nation is you know is intricate, is complex, but I think taking care of your folks, right? Like this work can't be sustainable if the folks who are immersed in this work can't even sustain themselves. And that's at just a physiological level. Like our activists should not be struggling. No one should struggle. If we say nobody should struggle for food, why are activists struggling for food?
Right.
And why would we then look at our activists and say that they should? Like it's and I don't get mad about that because like I said, it's a lot for me to unpack. It's a lot for other people to unpack. But when I look at this, to me, I look at like if you don't eat, you can't fight. Period. Not a subject. And so I want to make sure that folks is fed. You know what I mean? And we continue to build capacity. Like, yeah, 21 million went to folks inside of the community that would not have been there before, and that to me is a win. Is it perfect? Nah. Can we do better? Yeah. Should they do better? Yeah. Start with the families and start with the folks who jumped it off. Period.
One thing too is that we're also like, especially in abolition work, like we're trying to build a way to for Black folks to be sustainable for themselves, right? So like part of that work is creating those structures and then creating that vision and then displaying that vision, and then it could be copied and pushed further out, and then eventually one community has it and another community has, like it's we should be setting the example of what we are fighting for. And so if we're fighting for everybody to survive and to thrive within our communities, by us, for us, like instead of relying on the system for anything, then that is exactly like when people go to BLM Sacramento and they give us a donation of $20 or $25, they're giving us money to do the work that we do. They're not saying, oh, this is only if this, or only if that, or only if you don't buy a soda with it. Like you cannot drink no water by yourself with this money, or, put gas in your car to get to go to work, to go do the work that you're doing. It's given as a donation to support our work. And part of our work is us. And it's a huge part of our work. A huge part of our work is us. So like and I'm not saying that like just the three of us, I'm talking about Black people as a collective, like that is our work. And we have to build these structures. We have to create these ideas. We have to make things visible to people that they can't envision on their own, so that we could start moving in these directions that we're fighting for abolition. Part of that is creating resources and utilizing resources. And like, along with that old rumor, which isn't true, but like, oh, BLM started with a white man, or George Soros pays them money. And it's like, okay, reparations. Like, if George Soros gives us money, I'm going to spend it on our community, because that is reparations. Like, white folks should be giving us money, and the richer they are, or the more money that they have, then that's a bigger gift that we could utilize to become independent, because we have to invest in our independence. Like, and that gets into a whole nother conversation when I start using the word independence, but to get free,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And it's like immediately when you said like go here's the money but you can't buy this, it's like it's the same. I think often we do that with like it's the ownership of money and then the distrust of Black leaders to handle money, right? Hey, I'm gonna give you this 20, but don't do this and this with it. It's like homeless folks, unhoused people. Oh, what are you going to spend it on? Oh, I don't trust you. Are you going to spend on food, or are you going to spend on alcohol, right? Like, it's like, well, again, you're like trying to then own that person or that entity or that movement because you gave $20 or because you gave some type of thing that is owed anyways, right? And so it goes that you need to let go this sense of ownership and ego with whenever we give money. Oh, that's my money. I want to make sure I know where it goes. You don't do that with breast cancer commercials that everyone gives, $1 a day to, when 90% of that money goes into commercials,
Right.
but commercials and profiting, for the employees. So it's like, why do you distrust Black leaders?
You don't do it with the 10% that you pay in taxes to your city, where 50% of that budget goes to the police.
And the only time you talk about where that money goes is
all of this energy that you did just for the taxes you paid to your city, and said, why the fuck is 50% of that or more going to the police, we would be in a better situation. Period. Just give all of this energy that you're looking at and all the other shit to the shit you don't even have a choice with. Your tax dollars, no matter whether you buy a soda at the store or whether you're working at a job, boils up to a city budget, county budget somewhere. And I guarantee you a sheriff or a police officer is getting paid. Period. Not in the subject. And I guarantee you that they're taking at least 40 to 50% of your city budget. Just take a look at it. And if that don't make you mad, if it don't make you as mad as it makes me mad, then you got things that you got to think about. Because that shit makes me mad. Like, I don't have a choice. I don't even get a choice in it. That just automatically gets pulled out and given to white people to come hunt my people, period. They don't even live in my community.
And then that, if I bring it back to the nonprofit industrial complex, like I used to work for this lawyer, a political consultant, and he had me do this project once where I had to like find out the salaries of all of the like top 3 people at these nonprofits. And these are large nonprofits like the American Lung Association or Goodwill or things like that. And these folks make money. They make so much money. So like you gave the example of a breast cancer commercial, and then the donations come in. A lot of that is going toward these 6-digit salaries. Like, it's very real. And because they're trusted organizations doing good work by good white people that smile humbly at you, there's no questions being asked. It's all anti-Blackness again.
People only ask where their money goes when they think Black people are gaining any cent of that. That's why folks don't know where that 10% of their taxes go until they say, oh, it's going to Black folks who are unemployed and don't want to get a job.
Right.
Oh, you know your money went there?
But that's not true.
How you find that out? How you find that out? But you didn't know 40% of it goes to the military too? Oh, you didn't, but you know it went to some Black person who don't want to get a job, right? Even though more white folks are unemployed. But I mean, regardless, right? It's just, I think people only care about where their money goes when it goes to Black lives.
All right. I want to be like, ain't that the truth? to this whole conversation tonight. It's 8:07, so we're at an hour. I don't have any pig of the week. I'll work on that. I'll do better. Actually,
you could have folks watching just do a pick one.
Yeah.
Just drop one in the chat. Just who's your pick of the week? Go ahead, throw any of them out.
I want to say Misty Johnson. She's the one that pulled over Tobias in Elk Grove and mugged him for a good 30 minutes while his mom was telling her to leave, like give him the ticket and leave.
That dusty mouth.
She tried, y'all. They had their court date. So they got a lawyer, they had their court date. It was just to like counter the ticket. It wasn't like they went to court for a lawsuit or anything. But she tried to make it so that it would not be televised because she said that she was being threatened. She said that somebody killed her roses and she knew it was the movement. Literally, like they threw something on her roses that killed them. Because that's what we do.
We out here killing bushes.
I'm not about to hurt nobody's plants. I love roses. Like, are you kidding? I might pick your roses, but I'm not going to kill them.
We out here killing your bushes. You know what? The great part about her comments is it really shows you how crazy that somebody was out here and they was killing my bushes, and I saw a cat run around the street and somebody painted some graffiti across the wall.
Yes.
I know it's all involved. Like, go home and take a nap. We ain't got no time for that. Ain't nobody got time to kill your bushes, honey. Like, that shows how paranoid you are against Black people.
Right.
And why you didn't want to televise is you knew you was gonna show your whole ass about like, and then they killed my bushes. And I want that televised. I want everybody to see officer of the law coming in and show how absolutely ridiculous they are.
So the judge didn't honor the request. So it was televised. Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, Misty Johnson.
Misty
Is
Johnson.
it Johnson? Yeah, Misty Johnson. Yeah. You see my cat yelling at me? She's like, bitch, get off. Uh, that's Ebony. Okay, hold on. All right. So, you don't have anything to throw out there before we end this podcast?
Love y'all.
All right. Love you guys too. Have a good night.
Later.
Enjoy yourselves tonight. All right. Bye.